You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Julian Treasure, who's the author of a book called Sound Business, and he's the chairman of the Sound Agency. He's based in London. Julian, it's a pleasure to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Doug.
Your specialty is sound and listening. Tell me, what is listening really all about?
Well, listening is something that many people don't actually do very much of. Actually, we have four ways of communicating, of course: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And although listening, according to the research, takes up possibly 60% of our time, we only retain roughly one word in four that we hear. Listening, I define it as making meaning from sound. So it's distinct from the process of hearing. We hear an awful lot of sound all through the day. What we listen to is what we select to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I guess my wife would say that about me, that I have selective hearing sometimes, or selective listening.
Probably the latter, actually. Hearing is pretty universal. I mean, I've got some damaged hearing because I've been a drummer for years, but, hearing is not selective. Listening is what's selective. And there's a great quote by Ernest Hemingway. He says, most people never listen. And I completely agree with that.
Do you feel that maybe over the years there's just so much more noise out there? I kind of feel every day I'm bombarded, where when as a kid, I don't remember that feeling.
There's so much noise around us. The world is definitely getting noisier. And there are many reasons why people don't listen so much anymore. And there was a time when you had to listen, because if you missed it, you missed it. We didn't have writing. We didn't have any way of recording things. These days we're surrounded by noise, so our natural habit becomes to suppress sound and to ignore it. So we stop listening. And indeed, many people adopt a very common tactic to get away from the noise around us all the time. It's a bit like when you were a kid, you could stick your fingers in your ears and hum. Well, now you can do that with an iPod or a mobile music player and a pair of headphones, and that's how many people take refuge.
Or you can simply put on white noise, which is what I find I sometimes do when I want to do writing and I want to block everything else out.
Yes, I'm not a great fan of white noise, I have to say. It is a stochastic sound, and that means it's composed of a huge number of tiny individual events. And we do find stochastic sound quite easy to set aside. I mean, what you'll notice is after a while you won't even hear the white noise.
Right. That's why I use it.
Nevertheless, I think it does take energy to ignore it. And there are other sounds which perhaps are rather more healthy to use, which achieve the same objective, such as birdsong, or gentle surf, or the sound of running water. And these are other stochastic sounds that we've evolved with over hundreds of thousands of years, and which we've become very used to. And in fact, birdsong is a sound we use a great deal with our clients. It's a very useful sound because we've learned over a long period of time that when the birds are singing, we're safe. It's only if they suddenly stop you have to be worried. So birdsong creates a nice mixture of a relaxed body with an alert mind, because we also know that when the birds are singing, it's time to be awake.
That's interesting. Does that also help to block out the outside sounds?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Birdsong is a perfectly good masking sound if that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. So I'd prefer to see that being used in offices rather than white or pink noise being broadcast all over the place.
All right. I'll try that in my next writing session. You mentioned clients. You actually work a lot with business, and your book is called Sound Business. How is it that businesses benefit from your wisdom?
Well, fortunately, it's a fascinating subject because most businesses haven't thought at all about sound, which is, when you think of it, quite bizarre. We experience the world in five senses, and so we experience a brand in five senses. And although many brands are starting to understand that brand experience is just as important as brand promise, they often haven't thought about it. I often have the conversation where I say, do you have a brand book? Yes, we have a brand book. Great big thing. How many pages are about sound? Oh, none. That's almost universal, or at least it was. So we've now been working for 10 years with some of the world's biggest brands, showing them that, unfortunately, this is true. Good sound is good business, especially, for example, for retailers.
Why is that? Or how did that work, actually?
Well, it works because we can improve retail sound massively, and generally the process is that if sound is unpleasant, we just naturally move away from it. Now, as I said before, we tend to suppress sound and not be so conscious of it, so we may not even know that we're leaving that shop or that restaurant or whatever it might be, that coffee bar, because the sound in there is bad. But that's what we do, and any retailer knows that dwell time is directly associated with sales. The longer you stay somewhere, the more you're going to spend in there. So we're in the business of kind of, if this was smell related, we're in the business of stink removal a lot of the time. It's about removing bad sound and replacing it with something that's just pleasant to be in. Now, I am absolutely not talking about mindless music all over the place.
Hey, it's different for each store, I would presume, as well.
Yes, I think every brand should have a different sound, and so you should be able to close your eyes in any branded space and know where you are, and that's very much not the case at the moment.
That would be very interesting. We are talking with Julian Treasure, who is an expert in sound. He's the author of the book Sound Business, chairman of the Sound Agency. He's been in Time Magazine, The Economist, UK national TV and radio. He travels around the world talking about sound. We've been talking about it in the big picture, sort of the corporate model, but I know a lot of what you talk about is helping people simply become better at listening, which I think applies a lot to personal finance, as my day job is that I'm an investment advisor, a financial planner, and I work frequently with husbands and wives, and one of the issues that I find comes up the most is that they simply aren't listening to each other. And one thing is the way spouses communicate, but I think there might be something fundamentally about the way people are listening today. How can people actually become better listeners?
Yes, well, this is a big, big subject, and I think you're absolutely right, Doug. What many people don't realize is that we listen through a whole set of filters the whole time. And those filters, for many people, are kind of fixed because they're not even aware of them. So these are things like our culture. I mean, different cultures listen in different ways. Our language. Some languages on the planet don't even have words for time, for example. Mm-hmm. Our values, our beliefs, our attitudes, the things we grow up learning and accreting from the experiences that we have. And in any situation, also our expectations and our intentions in that situation will change our listening. So this is all a process of selection. You know, there's a huge amount of sound around us. The filters are what we use to select the sound we're going to pay attention to and listen to. And there are many different listening positions. That's a metaphor. I'm not talking about physical positions. But I mean, imagine there's a house on a hill. If you don't like the way that house looks, you can get up and walk around the other side of the hill and see if it looks better from there, yes? Mm-hmm. Well, in the same way, if you're listening to something, you can change your listening position, but many people don't. In fact, the vast majority of people are in a kind of concrete bunker looking at the one side or listening to this one perspective, and they don't change it. And the male-female thing you mentioned earlier is a very interesting one. Men tend to listen in a particular way, and I call it reductive, which is to say men tend to listen for a point, for a purpose, to solve something, to fix something. So a typical male conversation would be, you know, I say to you, I've got this problem, Doug, and you say to me, here's the solution. I say, thanks, and that's, you know, done and dusted. Nice and effective. That's how men tend to talk.
Sure.
Women, on the other hand, tend to talk, and I know this is a slight gender stereotype, but nevertheless, there's a lot of truth in it. Women, on the other hand, tend to listen in a way that I call expansive, which is to say, there isn't a point as such. It's the journey that they're on that they enjoy. They're just being together, and wherever the conversation goes is where it goes. Mm-hmm. Now, men can find that very frustrating, and women equally can find the male way of listening very frustrating. So a typical mismatch of these things would be she comes home and says, I've had a rotten day, and he says, have a bath, you'll be fine.
Right.
Now, that's not what she wanted.
Right.
But for him, that's a perfectly good conversation. He's solved the problem. Now he can go back to watching the football. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right in that our listening is very different compared to other people. We have to understand we all listen in different ways. And I'm sure that's very much true of our relationship with money as well.
So let's go through for a specific example, because when I sit with clients, I have a limited amount of time. You know, I don't go to their house every night. They'll come in, we'll meet for an hour or two, and there are very specific decisions that have to be made. Change your budget, buy this stock or mutual fund. We do have to get to the point on the one hand. On the other hand, I do try to be a good listener. In fact, I think a big part of what I do is more of a marriage counselor than an investment advisor, because I'm just trying to understand what people are, what they're really saying, not necessarily what their words are saying. But at the end of the meeting, I have to give them something practical. How could I say that? I guess with the men, again, just a stereotype. I tell them what I think the solution is, and they either take it or not. But what would be a way to present it so that I'm going on the journey with the women?
Well, you can't be that general, I think. I think what you need to be very good at, and I'm sure you are very good at this, is assessing the listening that you're speaking into. In other words, assessing the way that people have got their filters set, and everybody is different. For example, one decent way of dividing people up is into people who think, people who feel, and people who know. And so for the thinking people, you need to give them just facts and figures. They need to understand the reasons and the logic and so forth. People who feel, then you'd be using much more emotive words. How does that feel to you? I mean, where do you want to be? What do you want to be feeling in the future? So it's the kind of emotional side that you're appealing to. And people who know, don't bother me with the details. Just tell me the bottom line now. Mm-hmm. So, different people need to be communicated with in different ways. They have different listenings, and your skill and the skill of anybody who sells, for example, any great salesperson will tell you listening is much more important than speaking.
Yeah, I think that's very true, because also people have different needs in which they often, if they're not in their own environment, like if they're not financial people and they're coming into my office and don't understand really what's going on, they just want to talk about what their life should look like, and hopefully they'll be able to get some solutions for how to make the money work.
Exactly. So you may well find that you have to state the same solution to the husband and the wife in two different ways in order to get the same message across as clearly to both of them.
Mm-hmm. All right. There's a lot of noise. We mentioned that before, and all sort, both actual noise and just the way people talk. And we spoke about using bird noise or other noises. Any other tricks you can give us in the last minute or so about how we can keep from being distracted?
Well, I think it's a very good idea to have just a few minutes of silence in your day. It recalibrates your ears very well. It's also important to understand how sound is affecting you the whole time and to be conscious of it. To me, this is all part of a conversation about consciousness. And it's a great thing to become more conscious of everything around you. Sound changes your breathing, your heart rate, your brain waves, your hormone secretions. It changes your feelings, your moods. It changes how you behave all the time. And yet most of us are unconscious. So I think just if you start listening, you have no earlids after all. You're always hearing. If you start listening consciously, then it's like turning up the color on a black and white TV set. Suddenly, the world is a richer place.
I see. It's like my grandmother used to always tell me, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and there's probably a good reason for that.
Exactly.
All right. We have been talking with Julian Treasure, who wrote a fascinating book called Sound Business. He's the chairman of the Sound Agency based in London, but he travels around the world. Julian, it's been fascinating talking to you. In the last couple of seconds, could you just tell people how can they follow your work?
Well, I have a website, juliantreasure.com, and for those who are in brands or businesses, the Sound Agency also has one, thesoundagency.com, and I'm on the usual things, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth, so I'd be absolutely delighted to engage in any conversations. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Doug.
Okay, Julian Treasure, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.